Okay, so we're going to get started today. You got two handouts, and one of those handouts is your first assignment. So we'll put the exercise down for now, and we'll get into that a little bit later. Today's lecture is going to be split. Part of it will be actual demo, where I'll walk you through certain things in Photoshop. You'll get your feet wet learning Photoshop and learning some of the basics. So we'll go through that in a little bit. Before that, I'll give a lecture that talks about the processing techniques that we'll do today, so you get kind of an introduction to it. Before all of that, however, your first assignment came out today. It is due not this Wednesday, but next Wednesday. So you have a little over a week to do it. I told you at the beginning of the semester that you would always have at least a week to do an assignment. So I'm never going to give you less than a week. I try to give you a little bit more than that. So it always includes a weekend, which is important. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to pick your very best photograph. This photograph can be a new photograph that you've taken now that you've gotten the assignment. It could be one of the ones that you took for the exercise. That's OK, too. It does, however, need to have been taken from the start of the semester going forward. So you can't use a picture that you took on summer break. That's to even the playing field. So no like, oh, I went on a trip to Europe and I took all these great pictures. No. We're even playing field. It has to be something relatively current. So you see that right under part 1. It has to be from the first day of the semester forward, going this direction. You're going to do post-processing on that image. That could include cropping and resizing that image. It could include a levels adjustment. It could include a curves adjustment. Maybe you want to make your image black and white. You don't, however, have to do everything. So today we're going to go through a bunch of different post-processing techniques. You'll end up taking an image and you'll go through a bunch of steps. You'll convert it to black and white. You'll do a levels adjustment and whatever. That doesn't mean that you have to do it for your assignment. You're trying to make the best possible image. So you pick and choose which particular techniques are best for your image. Does that make sense? Okay, so it doesn't mean that you have to do everything. That's important. So part 2 in this is I'm going to ask you for two things. One, you're going to post your image online. And when you turn it in, you're going to write a little paragraph that says what you did. You're also going to include the original image. So I'll see a post that has your best image, what it started as, and a little paragraph that describes what you did. Doesn't have to be long-winded. This is not a writing class. It's not your English class. I'm not grading on how great your grammar is. I just want some basic, these are the techniques that I use to improve my image. It means some conscious thought. That's all. You will also send this particular image to the printer in the other lab, the 116 lab, and give me an 8.5 by 11 color print of the image. It would be nice if it was relatively large on the page. It would be nice, not required. Okay? I do, however, want that paper copy as a backup. Should something happen, should the website crash or whatever, I have a record that you actually gave me something on time. Does that make sense? So nothing fancy. You don't have to go to a print shop. You don't have to get it on glossy paper. I just need a record of it. That's it. It would be nice if it was color. And it would be nice if it was relatively the same size as an 8.5 by 11 page. OK, so all of that is due next Wednesday, the 18th. And if you guys run into any questions or whatever, you're more than welcome to ask me. But I think that basically covers what we're doing. So we will cover techniques today. We will cover more techniques on Wednesday. And we'll do yet more on Monday. So the bulk of what you need will be done this week. You'll have the weekend to do your post-processing on your image. You might want to add a little bit after Monday's class, and you should be good to go. So today we're going to talk about processing photographs and what are typical adjustments and things that we do in the world of photography. The truth is that almost always there's some kind of a correction that you can do to an image. If you were a professional wedding photographer, and I use wedding photographers because those are the kinds of professional photographers that tend to be really volumetric. They shoot a lot of pictures or whatever. They have a lot of experience. They probably can get most of their shots right without having to do too much post-processing, though they get paid enough to where they might do the post-processing anyway. What is a digital workflow? The term workflow essentially refers to a set of steps that we go through, that we typically go through when we process our images. And you guys already have a workflow right now. And it could be something as simple as take the picture, post it to Instagram. That's a workflow. It's like one step. It's not a particularly involved thing. Maybe you take the picture, you put a filter on it, or you combine a couple of pictures together, and then you post it to Instagram. It's still a workflow. So the same thing applies. We're just doing it on a little bit broader scale, maybe doing some better corrections than just a simple snap on your camera. The workflow always varies by the photographer and or by the equipment that you use. The hardware and the software is going to determine things. So I know for me, typically my images need a levels adjustment. For whatever reason, I can't seem to get that right when I shoot, so I always do a levels adjustment, or I at least always check to see if I do a levels adjustment. Now, if levels adjustment means nothing to you, don't worry, we're going to get to that in the second half today. So key components of the workflow. The first thing is always you have to go out and get the images in the first place. So you got to go out and take the images. After that, the next step generally involves getting the images into some computer format thing. Now, in the world of your phone, it's pretty easy. You take the picture, oh, it's already here. I can do it right from my phone. I don't have too much to do with it. But we're going to take it today another step. We're going to get it from your phone, because I'm guessing that's what most of you shot with. We're going to get it into the computer, and we're going to do some post-processing on it in the computer. And then ultimately, it's going to go out somewhere else. So we'll do some post-processing. Then we'll take it, and we'll do something with it. This has gotten really interesting. If you go back and you ask your parents to see old pictures, they'll pull out these big chunky albums, because that's what people used to do with pictures. They shot in film, they got their pictures developed, and they put the photos in the albums. Now in this day and age, we don't always do that much with our pictures. We take our pictures and they sit on our phones. Maybe they sit in Instagram, but that's about it. They never really get printed, they never really get put anywhere, and that's okay. But there is still an end to this. So when the image is done, it then sits wherever its container is going to be, whether that's on Instagram, whether it's just sitting on your phone, or whether you're actually old school and you print it out and put it in an album or something like that. You probably already have a workflow, though you don't know it. You probably already do some typical things when you go out and shoot your images. It's always a good idea to think about what software you plan to use. That helps. How involved your post-processing can be. If you're just working on your iPhone, there's not a whole lot you can do. There's a few edits that you can do, but you're not going to do a curves adjustment on your iPhone. It's just not going to happen. So you need to think about what it is that you're going to be editing and where it's going to be done. What kind of post-processing do you typically need to do? Like I said, I typically have to do a levels adjustment, so that's something I know and I always check on when I'm working on it. And are there any steps you can automate? Some of the programs have an AI feature in them where you can basically click a button and it does it for you. That can be a time saver long term. And then how will your photos be used? Are we just going to keep them on our device? Are we going to print them up in a big poster? I had a student come to me, this is probably 3 or 4 years ago, that said she got hired as an interior designer to do this person's room, and they wanted a mural on the wall that was a photograph, and the wall was 8 feet tall and 16 feet long. And I said, well, you realize the size of the image you need? And she's like, well, I was just going to look online and get an image, and it was like 1,000 pixels. I'm like, no, it's going to be like big squares because it's going to be so big. I said, you need a huge image to do this and to have it be clear. So you want to know where this is going. If you need that large of an image, you got to capture that large of an image to start with. So it's important to be aware of where it's going long term. When we ask the question about what software, this has changed a lot. Are you on a Windows machine or are you on a Mac? That makes a difference because some things are available to one or another. Are you on your own personal laptop? Are you on the lab computer? That's going to change what's available to you. Do you only have access to online? Are you going to work on one of the online editors? You could do that as well. Non-destructive editing is something that's very important, and some editors allow you to do it and other editors don't. So this idea of non-destructive editing is that when you perform a step, can you turn that step off? Okay, so let's use an example. This will make more sense. Let's say I convert an image to black and white. Can I selectively decide, you know what, I didn't want that image to be black and white. I've done a bunch of other things to it. I've done a levels adjustment. I've done curves adjustment. You know what, I really didn't want that to be black and white anymore. Can I check a box and turn the black and white off? Or do I have to Control Z and go through all the steps and undo? That's destructive versus non-destructive. Destructive is once I do something to it, that's it. Non-destructive is can I turn it off and turn it on, depending. And so sometimes this is a formatting issue, and we'll get to it. Free software processing of images is generally, you don't want to use more than about 10,000 images in it. You want to go into the professional realm if you have more than about 10,000 images. So let's look at some of the free options that are out there. I always like to point out the free options when possible. Google Photos is the first one. It's available for free from Google. It has a bunch of easy-to-use presets in it. You load in your photos. If you're already in the whole Android operating system, this is kind of built in for you. It's pretty easy to work with. Automated options, lighten my image, darken my image, those kinds of things. There's not too many advanced editing features, though. You're not going to pull up histograms or curves or something too advanced as part of it. You obviously need to have some kind of a connection to the internet because it's done through Google's servers. Photoshop Express Editor is a tablet application. It's it's Adobe's version of a mobile app. I don't think it's particularly good compared to something like Photoshop, but it is available. It is free. There's some presets built in. So again, same kind of thing. I want my image to generally look like this. Hit the button, and it kind of shifts it in that direction. It's pretty easy to work with those images. It has a few advanced editing features, but not too many. You need to have a connection to the internet. It is a destructive editor. So once you start messing with your images, it gets permanent. So that's something to be aware. And obviously, you need to have a phone or a tablet or something to run it on. Yeah?
So in the case of a destructive editor, just duplicate the photo before you start?
Yeah, or bring the photo in, keep your original somewhere else, then work on it. And then the disadvantage in the workflow part of it, though, is that if you make something and you keep working down the road, and again, it depends on the apps because sometimes they'll let you work on it until you save it and then it's permanent. So it depends a little bit, but you could get stuck doing something and then saying, really, that was too much and I want to back off. And so that can get problematic. But it's program specific as to how destructive it is. But again, yeah, saving a copy first is a good idea. Pixlr.com is pretty great. They have two actual apps. They have Pixlr X, this is online, and they have the Pixlr Editor, which if you look at it, it looks almost like Photoshop. It's actually really, really close. It's free and it's online, and it does almost everything that Photoshop does. The only thing it doesn't do is like adjustment layers. And so some of the stuff that Photoshop does, it doesn't do, but it's awfully good. So there's two versions. The Pixlr X is the kind of automatic. You click on the preset and it does it for you. The Pixlr Editor does require Flash on your computer, and it has some more advanced editing features, which is kind of nice. And the best part is it's free. Photos is free on every Mac. Again, Mac specific, so it's something to be aware of. But it has a lot of adjustments that are built into it so that you don't actually have to open Photoshop. And some of those advanced adjustments, like your histograms for your levels adjustments and stuff, it's nice to just be in one application, not have to take that photo out into Photoshop, make some adjustments, pull it back in. So it can be advantageous, but again, you're stuck. You have to have a Mac to make it play nice in this ecosystem. So it's important to kind of be aware of that. It does have extensive metadata support. We'll talk about what that means, which can be advantageous as well. Professional options, what's out there? So this one I didn't include until last year, and I've been pretty impressed with this. It's available for both Windows and for Mac. It's kind of a good hybrid between some easy click the button things happen and some advanced editing features. So you can still get into a lot of the advanced editing features without having to say buy Photoshop or keep the Adobe subscription. So it's pretty good, and it does a lot of pretty professional job on the images. Certainly something to play around with. I think they have a trial if you want to play around with it. It has a standalone app, but you can also have a plugin in Photoshop. So if you really like it and you want to work in Photoshop and keep that all put together. It also plays with Lightroom, and it plays with Photos. So if you're on a Mac and you have Photos, you can throw the image over into Luminar's and then do your edits and then throw it back in. So it plays nice, and it's certainly something that's worth mentioning in this space. Adobe Lightroom is really the only professional option out there that is about managing your photos and keeping your albums organized, and where do you store your photos and how do you back them up. Some of the CS, the Adobe Creative Suite, or what is it called, the Creative Cloud. Some of the Creative Cloud subscriptions include Lightroom. Some of them don't. You have to kind of figure out which plan you're on and whether it includes it. It's great for the kind of professional that has a lot of photos that needs to manage it and whatever. Most of the advanced editing features are built into it, so you don't have to go into Photoshop and then come back, though of course it's all written by Adobe, so they play nice together, which is a good thing. Apple used to have a great program that was kind of the competitor to this. It was called Apple's Aperture. I was really invested in Aperture. I loved it, and I worked with it for years, and then Apple killed it. So it doesn't exist anymore. So Adobe Lightroom is kind of the only option out there right now, and most professional photographers would be using this. Most of the advanced editing features, as I said, are baked in, so that's nice, so you don't have to go into Photoshop. Extensive metadata support. It is non-destructive editor at its core, so you're never going to mess with an original image. It's just layers on top of your image, and it's really easy to organize and to back up your images. And then the last one that's out there, again, requires the Creative Cloud subscription. It's the one we're going to be working on in this class, Adobe Photoshop. This is about as powerful as you can possibly get. You can do pixel by pixel correction. You can do pretty much anything in the world of photos with Photoshop, which is not too big of a surprise. Obviously, you have to have a Creative Cloud subscription to have it. It's a paid option. It's expensive, but you can do a lot. The big thing that I like to point out about Photoshop is not about organizing your photos and keeping track of them. It's about editing, and that's it. So you still have to figure out how you're going to store your images, how you're going to back up your images, where you're going to put them, what albums you're going to put them in, that sort of thing. That's on you, and that's what something like Lightroom would be for. Photoshop is really just about editing those images. And so in this class, we're not going to deal with organizing your photos or keeping track of your photos. We're going to deal with how do you really get into the advanced editing features. And so that's what we'll do starting today. So I want to talk a little bit about organizing those files before we move on. I'm going to skim through this a little bit. But I think this is something that's important. When you take a digital photograph, a bunch of information about that photograph is stored within the file itself. It's not information that you can see, but it's stored nonetheless. This is kind of like you might have had like an aunt or a great aunt who used to take actual print photos, and the little date would show up in the corner. It was like burned in orange. You guys vaguely remember this, right? My aunt was big on this. She would take these, and every one of her photos had the date in the corner. This is kind of the same thing, only you can't see it. So it records things like the date that you took the picture. It includes things like what is the size of the image. Let's see, what else? We've got the ISO. We talked about ISO last time. What the lens length was, what the exposure value was, what the aperture was, what the shutter speed was. So it stores all of that information together, and it even stores additional information. If you shoot it with your phone, guess what? You guys remember when you first opened up your phone for the first time and you opened up the camera app to take a picture? It said, do you want to allow the camera app to access your location? And you all said, yep, move on, I want to take a picture, right? What you did is you gave it permission to encode the GPS location for where you took your photo in the metadata of the picture. So you can see where physically you took that picture as well. So it's baking in that information. So there's a bunch of stuff that's stored in there, and that can really help you organize your files. So you could look at all the images that I shot with a certain camera, or a certain lens, or a certain shutter speed, etc. Organizing your projects here. We have albums. This is like a folder. You put your stuff in an album. It's a way of kind of basic organizing. You can do smart albums, so you put a specific criteria on it. Maybe you're rating your photos and you say, show me all the 4-star photos or something like that. So you have some flexibility there as well. Events, this came out maybe 7 years ago, 10 years ago. It was a pretty good idea. And the idea here is that typically when you shoot photos, you don't shoot one photo per minute or one photo every 2 minutes over the course of your life. You shoot a group of photos where you take a bunch of photos in like an hour or two, and then you don't take photos for a while. And computers are smart enough to know, well, generally, if you took a bunch of photos in the same kind of time period, it's probably related to one another. So they can automatically say, oh, this is one trip that you took, or this is one evening out that you did. And so it can group things by events, which is kind of nice. Facial recognition's at the point, you guys have all played around with this before, you've seen it happen, where it can basically tell who people are in a particular photo. Generally, you have to tell them the first time, hey, this is so-and-so, and then from then on, they know that particular person is in there. So in one of these organizational apps, you could say, show me all the pictures of my kid, or my wife, or my girlfriend, or my boyfriend, or whatever, and it would bring up all those pictures, because facial recognition is to the point where that's pretty commonplace. And then the last one here, you can organize by places. So where you shot, this is again based on those GPS locations encoded into the chips, or into the photographs themselves. Where did I shoot that particular photo? Show me on a map. Show me all the pictures that I took here. So let's move into the adjustments. This is really more what today is going to be about, and going through kind of what those typical adjustments are. And I'll start with the most basic one, and that is cropping and resizing an image. And so this is very much about saying, hey, I took the first image, and it really wasn't quite the right composition. You guys remember we talked about compositional techniques last class? Let me go into Photoshop and let me correct that composition. Let me make it better. Rule of thirds, etc. You'll see today when we do our crops that that grid automatically appears when we do the crop. So we can work with that rule of thirds. Remember, though, you can only make images smaller. You can't make them bigger. So every time you crop, it gets smaller. If you try to make something bigger, it's just going to get blurrier. So you can never add resolution to a particular image. So I have a bunch of examples here where cropping, you see that rule of thirds grid, making life much easier. I would absolutely love to work here. This would be my kind of work. But great, great composition with rule of thirds. Exposure. So let's say I improperly exposed a particular image. I can go in and make that exposure adjustment. The idea here is that we can lighten dark images. So you take an image, it's too light, we can go in and we can lighten that up and bring it back. If you shot in RAW, we can darken light images and get the detail back. Remember I showed you this example last class, where if we shot in RAW, we capture all the data, we can get that information back if we need to change it. If you shot in a JPEG, it's washed out that data, we've lost it because it's all white. When we try to get it back, we won't get the same effect. But we can try to darken light images. So here's an example. We got the image that's too dark, and then we correct the exposure, and now we can see the nose and that sort of thing of the dog. Brightness and contrast. These are kind of big, heavy moves. And it's not something that we're going to do too much of because they're just too broad. But the idea here is we can adjust the overall brightness of the image. We can have the image change so that it has stronger darks and stronger lights. It's better to use your levels and curves, though, because you'll get better results down the road. But it's something like this, where we have the first one, and we adjust the brightness and contrast, and we get the second one. If you took this image to begin with, you'd probably go take another image because it's pretty bad. So again, broad strokes, probably not something we're going to play too much around with. Color, saturation, and vibrance are three big things. We talked about white balance last class, where something ended up too blue or too orange. You could make that color shift. You could correct it by eye back to what you wanted it to look like. You could tint an image to a specific color if you wanted to, if you were looking for something specific that way. You could add more or less saturation and or vibrance. Now there's an important difference between saturation and vibrance that I want to show you, and I'll show you in the next slide. So saturation brings out the color in an image. So you have a hill scene, and you can increase the saturation, and you get more green and more blue, and it looks really pretty. The problem with saturation is if you have somebody with skin tones in that image, it increases the saturation of the skin tone, and you start to look like you went to a fake tanning bed or something. And it's not exactly what you were looking for in this process. So the great makers of Photoshop decided that saturation wasn't a good enough tool for all cases, so they made two tools. Saturation increases all the colors, and it boosts all the values of the colors. Vibrance, on the other hand, boosts the colors that aren't skin tones. So we get a boost in green, we get a boost in blue, and I guess unless you were an avatar or something, this would work out for you. So the key here is that we're using vibrance when there's people, and we're using saturation when there isn't people in that particular image. So there's a difference, and I'll show you that when we get into Photoshop post-processing in a little bit. Black and white or sepia tone, taking that color image and converting it to black and white. I would never encourage you to shoot in black and white. Don't go out and say, oh, I'm just going to shoot all in black and white. Shoot in color, process after. It's a much better strategy. Even if you know you want it to be in black and white long term, shoot in color and process in black and white. There's a lot of variables to black and white, to how you might process that black and white, to how you would show a black and white image. And I'll go through and give you those examples a little bit later on today. Focus. Sharpen an image or the edges of elements in an image to make them stand out. You could also slightly blur the image to get a little bit of a soft focus. It's important, though, to note that if the image is blurry because your camera shook or you moved the camera, you can't make it not blurry. So you can't correct big mistakes. This is a small scale thing. I have an example here. It's hard to show you an example without you guys doing it on your computers. And when you see it on the projector, it's always like, yeah, it's hard to see. The one on the left is the original image. The one on the right has a sharpening or an unsharp mask applied to it. And the idea here is that the edges of the magazine stand out just a little bit more. There's a little bit of contrast between those edges, and they pop just a little bit. So it's a subtle adjustment, but it is something that you can choose to do. Red eye reduction is another big one. Anybody know why red eye happens in the first place? No?
Flash, right?
What?
The flash.
Yep, it's related to the flash. Anything more technical than that? Okay, so we take out our phones, right, and we go to take a picture of somebody. Okay? Notice that the camera and the flash are right next to each other. Same thing happens on an old school camera, right? Where we go to take the picture, the flash and the lens are really close together. When do you need a flash? When it's dark, right? So we're in a room that's dark. What happens to the pupils of our eyes in a room that's dark? They open up, right? So those pupils are really big. Suddenly you take a picture and there's a bright light. That light goes right in through the pupils of your eyes, bounces right back, and shows as red. So the strategies for getting rid of it are post-process it in Photoshop. Move the flash away from the camera. That's when you go to a wedding and you see that there's this big apparatus with the camera and the flash is over here pointing that direction or whatever. That's to make sure that those are apart. You won't get red eye because it's not going in and coming right back. It's going in at an angle. You can't see it. The other option would be to try to constrict that iris down. So you see that when you turn on red eye reduction on your phone or whatever, it does a couple flashes first. The flashes are designed to shrink your pupils. Therefore, the light's not going to come in and bounce back. That's how red eye works. We can get rid of it in any of those options. So I've talked already a bunch about levels today, but I haven't explained what levels adjustments are. Basically, what a levels adjustment does is it takes an image and it says, this is true black and this is true white. And it adjusts the image accordingly. And this is a really hard one to show you on projector versus showing you while I'm demoing. And we'll do it all together. But I'll try my best to point this out for you on the projector. So the image on the left doesn't have the levels done. And the image on the right has had levels. And so if we look at the image on the left, and as we kind of look at it, if I were to say, OK, what is white on this image? And I'd say, OK, well, maybe the edge of this peeling paint there, maybe right there, that's about as white as that image is. Furthermore, if I were to look at this image and I said, well, what part is really black? Well, maybe one of these shadows, etc. But this white isn't really white. It's kind of a light gray. And this black isn't really black. It's kind of a dark gray. So what a levels adjustment does is it says, take this image and make that point right there truly white. And make this point right here truly black. And then spread my colors out in between. So we've defined where is black and where is white. And it can make a really big difference on having an image pop out for you and seeing texture. So we'll go through, we'll do that live, and you'll do it on your images so you'll really start to see it. Curves is another one that's almost impossible to show you until we actually play around with it live. But it's basically kind of like a levels adjustment, except that we can make adjustments only to specific parts of an image. We could take the light areas of an image and make them darker without affecting the dark areas. We could take the dark areas of an image, make them lighter without affecting the light areas of the image. So we can work selectively with parts of the image and not all of the image. So some examples here. Similar images, obviously, but there's subtle adjustment done. Same thing here. And then we get to where do we put them long term. And this slide used to be important because people used to care where they live. Now they just live on your phone or they live on Instagram, and that's it. More options for where you can put them. OK, so we're going to take a break. And I know I did a quick thing, but we're going to take a break and we'll log in to Photoshop because that's a new thing that we have to do in this class. So let's take about a 5-minute break. It's pretty early still, so I don't want to go too long. And then that way everybody can get logged into their computers and what have you. The important thing is when you first open Photoshop, we're going to have to log in. So I'll do that together with you in 5 minutes. Okay, so we're going to start back up. And I'm going to start this time with opening up Photoshop, which they've stored in the Adobe folder now. And when I go to open up Photoshop, and those of you that have been here and worked on these lab computers this semester will notice that this has changed. And I love it when things go slow. And that is that we're required to sign in using our Adobe ID. Now, it's important here that you don't have to have an actual Adobe subscription to do this. If you look down here at the bottom, there's a Sign In with Enterprise ID button. If you click on that and you type in your Insight email, it'll let you authenticate through the Insight system. So you don't actually have to have your own Adobe account. So my school email is different than yours because you have at insight.4cd.edu or something like that. So ignore the email I put in here. But and then here we go, redirecting you to sign in. And it'll pull up this that you guys are used to, your whole Insight portal thing. And you can log in that way. And so I wanted to do that live with you so that you guys knew about the Enterprise ID link and that you could log in without having your own Photoshop account. Now, I guess if you have your own Photoshop account through one of your home computer or whatever, you could use that, I imagine, on these and have it still work. But anyway, so we're going to go ahead and work with some images inside of Photoshop. I love that Photoshop always changes. They constantly make different things in terms of what you see when you first open it up. I'm going to go to the File menu, and I'm going to choose Open. And I have some images already stored in my OneDrive account that I'm going to use for my live demonstrations today. You guys are going to pick 3 of your favorite images from the assignment, or from the exercise 103 that we did last week. You'll pick your 3 favorite images. It doesn't matter what category they came from, and you'll open up all 3 of those images. I'm going to open up actually probably more than 3 because some of these little walkthroughs that I'm going to work better on some images than others. And so I'm going to repeat myself a lot as I go through this. So I have a few more images here. I'm going to go ahead and open all of those up. And I'll work with each of these images as we kind of go through, and I'll show you the various steps that are involved. So when Photoshop first opens up, and because this is our first day in Photoshop, I always like to spend a little bit of time talking through what's happening in the Photoshop window or whatever software it is that we're working on, so that you kind of know how Adobe sets things up, etc. So in the world of Photoshop, across the top, we have our typical file menu structure. File, save, that kind of thing is available to you as well. There is a menu item that's specific for layers. There's also a menu item that's specific for making selections, both of which can be important and will be important later on. There's also an image menu that allows us to do some adjustments, etc. We'll probably stay away from this for the most part, but I like to point out a few of those. The features like 3D, we're not going to worry about 3D Photoshop whatsoever, so we'll skip over that for now. Below that, we have a contextual ribbon that is based on whatever tool we have selected. So right now I have the Marquee Selection tool selected, and so I have information about the Marquee Selection tool. If I switch to a different tool, say the Crop tool, I'm going to get information about the Crop tool. So depending on what tool I have selected, that ribbon that goes across the top is contextually aware. It's going to change and tell me something different. Down the left side of the page here, I have our most standard tools. The ones that we're going to use most often are going to be available there. Notice that almost all of them have a little triangle in the corner. That means if I click and hold on it, I have other options hidden underneath it. So instead of just the rectangular marquee tool, I have the elliptical tool, the marquee tool, or a single row or a single column marquee tool. So the point being, there are other options hidden underneath. In some cases, we'll actually end up using some of the options underneath. And so like the quick selection tool underneath has the magic wand. So be aware that the way they set up the toolbar, there's hidden tools that we may or may not use. Across the top here, I have all the images that I have open. You may only have one image open. You might have 3 images open. That just allows us to toggle between specific images as we go forward. Over on the right here, I have right now something that's color or swatches. That's not particularly relevant for what we're working on. So I'm actually going to switch the workspace away from being this standard workspace. And I'll do that by coming far over here, almost where you close the program altogether. There's a drop down right here. And you see that we're currently in Essentials. We're going to come down to Photography. And because that's what we're working on, it makes more sense to see photographic stuff than it does to say just the Essentials. And so in this case, I'm seeing the histogram, which looks an awful lot like levels. So that's a good thing to see. We have a navigator that shows us what we're actually looking at on the particular page. That'll make sense a little bit later on. And then down here we have our layers. Today we're not going to work at all with layers. Next class we will work with layers. But it's important to note that it's down here and available for you as well. So a couple other things, some keyboard shortcuts that are important. If you want your image to fill the whole screen, you can press the Control key followed by the 0 key, and that will fill your image to the page or to the available space. So for example, on this image that's a little bit smaller, I can press Control and then 0, and it zooms in. And I apologize because I'm not showing the key commands today. I didn't start that. So I can do that for each one of these images. Control and then 0, and then Control and 0, and you can see that it's zooming in on each of these images for me. And there's my last one, Control and 0. Okay, so we're going to now work with all of your 3 images. You're going to be performing a bunch of different steps to every one of your images. It's possible that these adjustments won't make that much of a difference to every one of your images. So one of your images might not need a levels adjustment. I still want you to go through the practice of doing it. So today's a lot about repetition in this learning process. So the first thing that we're going to do is convert several of these images to black and white. I'm actually going to start with this one because I think you can see more in the conversion of this particular image. The tutorial that I'm going to follow is Photoshop 1.1. which if you go to the course website, you go to tutorials, you go to Photoshop 1.1, it will actually walk you through everything that we're going to do. There's a little video if you want to watch that part. But it'll walk you step by step through what's happening in this particular exercise or part of the exercise. So we're going to go ahead and convert that image to black and white. Now, what people do that aren't experienced in Photoshop is they come up to the image menu, they go to mode, and then they say, I want it to be in grayscale. Notice that it pops up this thing saying discard color information. It's kind of extreme. It seems like a really bad thing to do. But I could do it. I could discard it, and yep, there it is. It's in black and white. Not too much fine control. So let's go back for a second, and let's do it a different way. So I'm going to do this using a specific type of layer. And this layer is called an adjustment layer. And what Photoshop allows us to do is it allows us to create a layer on top of our original image, and with that image, perform some change on that particular image. And so as we make that change, we can then choose to turn on and turn off that particular change going down the road. So I'm going to go to Layer. I'm going to choose New Adjustment Layer. And over here, I'm going to choose something called the Channel Mixer. So it's Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and then Channel Mixer. And when I do that, we see that I have a new layer dialog box pop up. This allows me to name the layer. By default, it's called Channel Mixer 1. To me, that's not going to help you out, so I'm going to go ahead and title this Black and White. And when I'm done, I'll go ahead and say OK. So I now get a black and white Channel Mixer layer. It's right there as an adjustment layer. And when I initiate that, I get a little pop-up windows here that's called Properties. And so this little Properties window that pops up allows me to make some adjustments. And so the first thing that I can do is as I look down here, I can see there's a checkbox for monochrome. Well, if I check that monochrome box, my image is going to turn to black and white. Now, nothing popped up saying, are you sure you want to discard color information? Because I didn't discard any color information. I just said, go ahead and turn that from color into black and white. So now it's in black and white. The other thing that I want you to pay attention to is something up here called preset. And so if I look at preset and I click on it, it's currently set as custom. But notice that there's a bunch of presets built into Photoshop that are black and white, infrared, blue filter, green filter, orange filter, red filter, and yellow filter. If you were, let's say, an Ansel Adams where you took black and white photography, or you were a professional black and white photographer, you might go out with your camera and you might have filters that go on your lens that skew the color toward blue or toward green or whatever. Photoshop allows us to mimic the same thing using software. And so what I encourage you to do is not learn the difference between these colors, but go ahead and cycle through each one of these and see which one makes your image look the best. So we'll start right here with black and white infrared. Okay, so that's one version of a black and white photo. Let's do the blue filter. Well, that's another version. Let's do the green filter. That one's not too bad. Let's come down here to the orange filter. I'm liking that one. We can come down here to the red filter. Yeah, that one's pretty good too. And the yellow filter. No, I don't like that one as much. I think for me, to my eye, it would be the red filter or the orange filter that I like the most. I think I like the red filter the most. So I've gone and I've cycled through the various colors to pick which one looks good. And so this is very different than saying just discard the color information and make it black and white, because I've selectively thought about how I want to make the image black and white. Now you can see down here in when we do the changes in filter, so let's say the orange filter, you can see that these sliders change. The red, green, and blue sliders change. We'll adjust these a little bit later on in one of the future steps. But for right now, I just want to point out that they change. And so you could manually adjust them. The other thing to point out is that typically all of these values add up to 100%. So it would be a little funky if we started to change two of the values and it didn't add up to 100%. The image wouldn't turn out the way we wanted it to. So typically, they're always going to add up to 100%. So this is the black and white that I kind of like. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stick with that as my black and white image. So that allows us to do the first part of what it is that I'm working on. So let me repeat that. I'll pick another image to repeat that with, just so that you can see me repeat it. You guys are going to be repeating it frequently today. And that's to kind of get those baked in and to be pretty easy going down the road. So here's the next image that I'm going to convert to black and white. I'm going to go to my layer menu. I'm going to go to New Adjustment Layer, and I'm going to choose Channel Mixer. So Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Channel Mixer. And I'll call this, again, black and white. I'm a big fan of naming layers so that they're obvious. So black and white is a good, obvious name for your layer. So that brings up the Properties window right here. I'm going to go ahead and check the box for monochrome, which converts the image into black and white. And then I'm going to go through my various presets. I'll start with infrared. Nope, that one's not too good. And we'll go to each of these options. And I think it's going to be the yellow filter for this one. It gives us our best option. All right, one more time. I'll pick another image. Let's pick this one. Once again, I'll go up to my layer, New Adjustment Layer, Channel Mixer. I'll call this black and white. I'll say OK. I will check the box for monochrome, and then I'll cycle through my various presets. And I think in that case, it might be the blue filter. I don't know. I'd have to spend a little bit more time deciding which one I liked best. But that's converting to black and white. Now, the advantage on all of these is that if you decide you don't want your image to be black and white anymore, it's as simple as coming down to the Layers menu here and clicking the eyeball next to where it says black and white. So if I click on that, the black and white goes away. Furthermore, if I click on it again, it comes back. So this is a perfect example of non-destructive editing, where I can selectively turn this on and turn it off. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it off. And I'm going to move on to the next example here, and that is Photoshop 1.2 levels adjustment. So once again, I have a walkthrough that explains the levels adjustment. I'm going to go ahead and do it for you in person here as well. So this one I'm going to cycle through a variety of images and do it because some images you need to do more of a levels adjustment than others. So in this particular example, remember I'm looking for what is white and what is black in this particular image. So if I look at this image, the cloud here is awfully close to white to begin with. And the black of, say, this branch or this branch, maybe this tree here, is pretty close to black. So there's not too much adjustment to be made. I can also see over here in my histogram that my distribution of colors from black to white is pretty much all the way. So a levels adjustment here isn't going to do too much. I'll come back and I'll do that one in a second. This image, however, let me turn it to black and white, or back, away from black and white. I have something that's almost black right here, but my white, I don't really have a true white in here just yet. So this is one that will benefit from a levels adjustment. So let me go ahead and go up again to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and this time I'm going to choose Levels. And this is, the layer is called Levels 1. That seems a reasonable name, so I'll go ahead and say OK. And that then brings up my properties again, and it shows that same histogram that I was looking at over here. My black is already set all the way there in that corner. As I look at the distribution of colors, though, at this end, you can see that I get kind of a almost white, a very light gray, but I don't get true white because there's a gap at the bottom of this histogram. What I'll do is I'll take this little triangle and I'll drag it over to where that graph starts to go. And so it's a very subtle adjustment, but it brightened up the image just a little bit. Let me pick an image with a bigger change for you to see. Let me pick this image. There we go. So once again, I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. We'll go ahead and say OK. And so in this histogram, you see that I really don't have a true black. And so there's my histogram. That's where my kind of dark gray start. So I'll take this little triangle and I'll pull this over until it gets to the start of that graph. It's right about there. So now you can see there's a pretty big difference between this, where I started, where there isn't a true black, and right there, where there is a true black. I've really changed the image quite a lot. And so there it is, toggled on and toggled off. Another example, we'll use, trying to find one. Yeah, maybe we'll try this one here. I'll go into my Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Levels. We'll go ahead and say OK. And this scenario, I don't really have a true white. That's close. It's kind of a light gray. So I'll pull the white down to be more there. I could even pull it further. You can see that you can keep going, but it's usually right about there. And my black, I'll pull my black over to right about there. And so now we can see that it's adjusted both and push the color a little bit more, push the darkness. Let's see. Another example here. So Layer, New Adjustment Layer, we'll do Levels. And there's my histogram again. I'll pull the white point over just a bit, and I'll pull the black point over to right there. And so we can see the contrast changing. So hopefully when you guys pull up your images, you'll be able to see this and see the effect. It's much easier for you to see on your computer, but those are the steps necessary to get to a levels adjustment. So we'll move from there into a curves adjustment. And this is another one that's hard to see until you actually see it done live. I do have an example here under curves. This is Photoshop 1.3 that will talk through what's happening. I'm going to go ahead and start with this image. I'm going to turn off the levels adjustment for right now, and I'm going to show you the curves adjustment. So I'll go ahead and go up to my Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and instead of choosing levels, I'm going to choose curves. I'll go ahead and say OK. And so now we get a different graph over here in the Properties window. And what's important to note about this graph is that I have a diagonal line that goes from the lower left to the upper right. Pixels that are on the lower half of this are going to be made darker. Moving this line up is going to make things lighter. Let me show you some examples. So if I were to grab the middle of the line right here in the middle, and I were to drag this line down, it's going to make all the pixels in the image darker. Now notice when I do that, it really enhances the sky. The sky looks a lot better. But I'm losing a lot of what's happening down below in the ground. If I were to pull this up the other direction, I'm lightening it, and I can see more detail in that part of the image. So I have flexibility in terms of how this is changing. Now, that's adjusting the image as a whole based on this curve. If I go back and leave that right in the center, I could also choose to adjust, say, just the lighter part of the image. So I'll leave that pegged. I'll come up here, and I'll move just this part lighter or darker. Now you can get weird results, right? So if I make them go inverted here, this is like you're watching Stranger Things and you go to the other side or something, right? So we don't necessarily want that. A typical adjustment for curves is going to look slightly like an S. So if I pull that one up and I pull this one down a little bit, I'm going to get a little bit of an S curve. See how that kind of looks like an S? That is a typical curves adjustment, and you can see it does change the image quite a bit. So let's do it again on another image. Let's take this one. I'll go up to my layer, new adjustment layer, and I'll go into my curves adjustment. There it is. I'll peg the center. And a good place to start is to try with the S curve. So I get just a little bit of an S. Now in this particular case, it ended up making the image a bit too dark for me. So I might not do that curves adjustment on this image. And that's where some editing is necessary. So if I came back to, say, this image, let me turn off my levels for just a second. I'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, Curves. Say OK. I'll peg the center. And we'll adjust that up a little bit, and we'll adjust that down just a little bit like that. And again, you can toggle on and toggle off to see how it's changed the image. So they're small adjustments, but they can really enhance the image as a whole. So that's the curves. The next one that we'll go through is Photoshop 1.4, which is called Pop. And essentially what we're doing here is we're boosting some of the color values in an image. This works really nicely for landscape scenes. So something like this scene would be a good candidate. A sunset like this would be a great candidate. And again, it's hard to see on the projector, so as you guys do it, you'll start to see it happen. If you have an image that doesn't have a lot of color in it, you're not going to see as much of a change with something like this. So on the Pop, what we're going to do is we're going to bring up that channel mixer again. So we'll go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and we'll go to Channel Mixer right here. And I'm going to call this one Pop. And I'll say OK. And actually, I should turn off the curves adjustment for right now, so we're back to our basic image here. And so this is much like we did with the black and white. In the black and white, we checked the box for monochrome. We're not going to do that this time. Instead, we're going to come in here, and we're going to take the, hold on a second. I shouldn't have clicked on monochrome. Let me delete this layer and start fresh. Layer, New Adjustment Layer. We're going to go to our channel mixer. We'll call this one Pop. We'll say OK. There it is. So what we're going to do is on each of the output channels, so I'm on the red output channel right now, I'm going to boost the red and decrease the green and the blue. So in this red channel, I'm going to say, let's take this red and let's move it to 1/16. So we're boosting the red, and we're going to take, remember I told you that all of these should be add up to 0. So we're going to take the green and say -8, and we're going to take the blue and say -8. Oops. And now all of those add up to 100. We're then going to switch the output channel to the green channel, and we're going to boost the green value to 1/16. And we'll say -8 in the red and -8 in the blue. Then we'll switch from the green channel into the blue channel, and we'll repeat the process. 116, and we'll say -8 and -8. Now the 116 and 8, that's what I've found to be a pretty good value. Could we increase this to, like, 150 and say -25 and -25? Oops. Yes, but I think that would be too extreme on saturation in the blue value. So I've found that 116 to be about right. But if you want to change it and experiment with something, feel free to do that as well. And -8. So now that I've finished that, each of my output channels has changed, and we can actually see that it boosts the color just a bit. And this is where you're not going to see it as much on the projector as you are on your own examples. Let me use this one as another example here. So we'll go to my layer, new adjustment layer. We're going to do a channel mixer. And this is going to be pop. I'll say OK. And we'll go through each of my channels. We'll start with red. We'll do this as 116, -8, -8. We'll switch to the green channel, and we'll say -8, 116, and -8. And the last one will be blue here, and we'll say -8, -8, and 116 there as well. And so now we can toggle on and toggle off that pop, and we can see that it increases the saturation of the color just a bit. One more time, I'm going to use the sunset one for this example. And we'll go in to my layer, new adjustment layer, channel mixer. We'll call this pop again. And we'll start with the red channel, and we'll do 116, -8, -8. Switch to the green channel, -8, 116, oops, 116 and -8. And then we'll go to the blue channel at -8, -8, and 116. And I can toggle that on and off, and you should be able to see a difference in the color saturation. So that's pop. Next one that I'm going to work through is dodge and burn. And this one's a little bit different than the other ones that we've done so far. And what dodging and burning is it's kind of like back when you used to develop film in a darkroom. You could use different chemicals to selectively darken or lighten parts of the image. Photoshop allows us to do this. Now, what people tend to do is they jump straight to the dodge and burn tool, and they go right on their image and they do dodging and burning. The problem with doing that is it becomes kind of a permanent change because you're editing the image itself. We want to do it on a layer. So I'm going to go up to the layer menu, and I'm going to choose, instead of new adjustment layer this time, I'm actually going to go to layer and then new layer. So it's layer, new layer. We'll call this one dodge and burn. And before I say OK here, I need to change some options. This is going to make more sense next class when we talk about blending modes. But for right now, trust me, we're going to change our mode down here. So the name is dodge and burn. And then under mode, we're going to change to overlay. And so we've switched the mode to overlay. That's a blending mode, and I'll explain that next class. And we're also going to check this box right below it that appears that says fill with an overlay neutral color of 50% gray. And so we have dodge and burn, its mode is overlay, and it's being filled with a neutral color. We'll go ahead and say OK. And nothing happens. That's the way it should be. Now we can come over to our dodging and burning tools. And so these are available in our toolbar. They're about 3/4 of the way down. It starts with like a ball and a stick, for lack of a better term. And we have two options. The dodge tool is for lightening an image. The burn tool is for darkening an image. I'm going to start with the burn tool. And I get a brush. And now whatever I click on is going to darken. So let me show you an example. So I can darken this part of the image if I want it to. The more times you click on it, the more you'll darken. So I can really start to push how dark that particular part is. I'm going to back up for a second. No. OK. And let me go back. Oops. One step too far. There it is. Now, I'm going to go back to that burn tool, and this time instead of using a small brush, I'm going to use a big brush. So I'm going to come up here to my contextually aware tools, and I'm going to change my brush size. It's currently set at 65. I'm going to increase it. Not quite that big. Maybe about 500 or so. Yeah, 500, something like that. And now I'm going to come to the edges of the image, and I'm just going to kind of paint in a little bit of darkness up in there along those edges. Minimize that just a little bit. And so we're just darkening up those clouds a bit for some mood. Maybe I'll darken up the bottom of the ocean here. Now, if you find that you go too far, you can switch into the dodge tool, which lightens. I'm going to make that brush bigger. I can also make the brush bigger by using the bracket keys on the keyboard, which sometimes is a little bit easier. And I could selectively lighten part of the image. Now, I'm not trying to tell you that this is the best looking image. I'm trying to show you how it works. Okay? But I could lighten up that center part of the image if I wanted to, leaving the foreground here in the sky darker or lighter, etc. So that's how dodging and burning works. Let me do it again. I'm going to go to this image here. I'm going to go up to my layer. I'm going to go to New Layer. We're going to call this one Dodge and Burn. My mode is going to switch into Overlay. And I'm going to check this box for Fill with an Overlay Neutral Color of 50% Gray. I'll go ahead and say OK. It gives me Dodge and Burn. I'm going to switch into my Burn tool right here. And I'm going to darken up this part of the image right there. That always seemed a little bit light to me, so we'll darken up that shadow. Maybe like that. Maybe a little bit more in there. Like that. Now maybe we want to darken also a little bit of the edge of the sky right up in there. Maybe a little bit more right in there. Yeah, it's about like that. And so now I can toggle on and toggle off, and you can see that it's really changed. Well, you guys can't see it. I can see it. That has changed a lot of the image. So that allows us to selectively lighten and darken parts of the image. So that's the fifth tool that we've gone through today. When we're done going through all, so you're going to take your 3 images, and you're going to go through all 5 of those tools. Not everyone will be particularly relevant to your image. It might not look that great, but I still want you to do it. I want the practice of doing it. When you're all done, you can save your work as a Photoshop file. This will preserve all the layers that you've created. So I could take this image right now, and I could go to File and then Save. And this is going to save as type here is set as Photoshop. And I can put it into my folder for today. Let me create a folder for fall of 2019. And then I could go ahead and save this. It's going to change the extension to a Photoshop file, and that will allow me to come back and open it up again and still see all of my layers. Now I also need to create one that I'm going to post. So in this scenario, I'm going to turn everything off, and I'm going to start with my original image. So here's my original image. I'm going to go up to File and then Save As. There it is. And I'm going to change my Save As type to be a JPEG. Now we have some other options here, and I could go ahead and click Save and save it. Let me see. They've changed around a few of the options. Let me try an export. Let me do Export As and see if it allows me to adjust. Yeah, okay, I like that a little bit better than Save As. So let me go through that again. I'm going to go for Nothing is On. This is where I'm going to start. I'm going to go to File and then Export, and I'm going to go to Export As. And we'll take my format here and we'll switch it over to JPEG. And then under image size, you're going to be posting these online. I don't need the full resolution versions. We can cut the file sizes down and make everybody's life better if we do that. I'm going to take whatever the larger number is here. So in this case, it's the width, and I'll make it 1,000. And that'll automatically scale the other version. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and say Export All. It's going to ask me where to save it. I'm going to do a new folder. Oops, I will save it in here. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to add at the end of the file here, I'd like you to add, this is original. So I'm just adding a little bit of information about it. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. Next thing I'll do is I'll turn on the black and white, and I'll do it again. I'll go to File, Export, Export As. It's still a JPEG. The size is stuck. That's good. We'll go ahead and we'll say Export All. And this time, instead of original, I'm going to add a BW for black and white. And I'll click Save. I'll turn off black and white. I'll turn on levels. That would be the next one. Though in this particular image, I don't have it. And I'll go ahead and go to File, Export, Export As. Same options, JPEG. Size is 1,000. We work our way down. Export All. And this one would be curves. And I'll go ahead and click on Save. You guys get this process, right? So we're going to end up with the original and 5 processed images for each. So that means 6 images for each of the 3, which means the total number you're going to upload today is 18 images. So it's a lot of images. Okay, so go through. You'll make all those saves. Then it's time to actually create the post. So I'm going to jump over to the course website here, and I'm going to show you the back of the handout has a walkthrough on this. Because there's so many images that are included, it's nice to show them just as a gallery with a little slideshow. So I'm going to walk you through that process. I'm going to go to New and then Post to create this new post. There it is. I'm going to go ahead and say this is exercise 104. All right, and then once I have that, I'm going to click on this tab right here for Gallery. And there I'm going to choose to Insert Gallery or Add Images. I'll click on that. And when I do that, I'll go ahead and click on Select Files. And the advantage here is that I can upload them all at once. So I'll go to my folder. And here we are. There's my images. You guys will have 18 images. I only have a few. So I'll take all of them. I'll click on the first one, hold down Shift so that I'm selecting them all. And I'll go ahead and click on Open. And when I do that, it's going to start uploading each one in a row. So it'll go to 100%, then it'll say crunching, then it'll go, etc. like that. When I'm done, I'll click Save All Changes. There we go. Then I'll close that. So once I've done that, I'm going to come over to the right side here, and I'm going to click on this under Format. I'm going to click on this button for Gallery. I'm then going to scroll all the way to the very bottom here, and I'm going to set my featured image. Now, because I just uploaded them, they should show up here as the most recent uploads. Now, I'm an administrator, so I see everybody's uploads. You'll just see yours, which makes it a little bit easier. I'll click on my favorite one and put that as the featured image. I'll scroll back up here a little bit. I'll make sure under Categories, I move down to our exercise 104. There it is. Last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to the Content tab right here. And with the Content tab showing, come on, doing a great job of reorganizing this page. I'm going to look for Slideshow on Post Page, and I'm going to click that toggle if it'll let me do it. Oh, come on. I'm going to go ahead and publish it, and I'll come back and fix that in a second because it's not loading correctly. There we go. Now there's a little toggle for Slideshow on Post Page. I'll click on that, and I'll click on Update one more time. Then let me go ahead and view the post. If I did it correctly, I'm going to see my image, and then I'm going to see a way of scrolling through all the images. It makes it a little cleaner than having a bunch of images. So that's the goal. If you have trouble with that, I can help you with that part of it because I know it's a little tricky to get it to work right. I wish it was cleaner. It's the way the website handles galleries, but it is what it is. So 3 images, 5 post-processings of each one. Save all of those and upload them. If you finish, start thinking about what you want your assignment 101 to be. what you want that first best picture to be, and start the post-processing on that one. Okay? I'll see you guys all next class, and we'll deal with blending modes and some more advanced Photoshop topics.